Welcome to our final session for Financial Freedom Seminar. And this one's going to be especially good, especially important because Dr. Jeff Crum is going to talk about wills and also leaving a legacy for your family. So I'm going to pray and then let him have the time. Father, thank you so much for these great lessons, sessions on finances to help us as Christians to be better stewards, better managers of what you have entrusted to us. We recognize it's from your hand, and you give us the strength, the mental capacity, the jobs. And so all of that is from you, and we thank you for it. And thank you for the principles from God's word that we've learned to better serve you with the money that you have given to us. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, amen. I want to thank you, Pastor, for having me. This has been a privilege to do this. I love teaching, and I love helping people improve their finances. Tonight, we want to talk about leaving a stress-free legacy, but let's just review a couple of things. We're doing this to build up the people of God. So we want to share these videos with others. If this is your first video, or maybe you don't recall some of the content from the other videos, you can go to YouTube and find them. There's a video on budgeting, there's a video on debt, there's a video on insurance, and we'll review that as we look at the triangle here. The first week, we talked about cash flow. That was income and expenses. That's the budgeting part. Then we were talking about protection, and the first part of protection is our cash reserve or our emergency fund. That's self-insurance, and then we also talked about several other kinds of insurance. And then last week, we were talking about saving for the future and different kinds of investments. And we talked about the investment ladder and what is most conservative and what is the highest risk and the things in between. Now, today, we'll be talking about leaving a legacy. And that's just kind of floating out there. Often we talk about our spirits floating away. The dead in Christ shall rise. So leaving a legacy is up there. You know, we can't guarantee that we're going to use our car insurance or our homeowner's insurance, but whenever it comes to our lives, unless the Lord comes back, we know that we're going to leave here. So our session today is about leaving a stress-free legacy, and we can reduce the stress. Now, maybe stress-free is overstated because it is very painful whenever our loved ones leave us behind. They're more blessed than we are, but we can reduce some of the stress that comes with that because we can have a plan and make it more predictable. Now, as usual, we'll go through some biblical matters, but first of all, I want to give you 3 essentials. The first essential is to have a current will. If you don't have a will, you need to go get one. And I'll tell you how to do that simply. It's probably best that you use a lawyer, but you don't have to. You need to keep your beneficiaries current, and I'll talk about how and where you can find that, how to change those things, and then how to avoid the high cost of probate. Most of us don't need to go through probate, but many of us do. We can avoid that in many ways. So let's, first of all, talk about our biblical foundation. Whenever I started looking at inheritance in the Bible, I found over 200 references that specifically use the word inheritance or pass on to your children, things like that. More than 200, that's quite a few. They start in Genesis. Here we've got Rachel and Leah, and they said, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? And then at the end of Genesis, remember, Joseph was taken away. His brothers, Joseph had his coat of many colors, and his brothers sold him into slavery. Joseph ends up in Egypt. Then his brothers and his father are hungry back in Israel, and they journey to Egypt only to discover that their little brother, Joseph, who used to have the coat of many colors, is now, the vice president of Egypt. And they get their father, and there's that wonderful reunion. And it talks about the inheritance of the brother and the inheritance, and even as part of the will of Jacob, he wanted his bones to go back home to Israel, even though he had died there in Egypt. So we've got this from the beginning, but then in recent weeks, we've talked about Matthew 25 and the good steward. Do you remember the good steward who had 5 or 2 talents, a bag of silver, maybe a year's wages, and they went to the exchangers. The King James says the exchange, the market, and they they multiplied. They were fruitful, and they multiplied what they had. But the bad steward was afraid, and he did not multiply. He went and buried his talent, didn't use it at all, got it a little bit dirty, and he lost it. Well, in Numbers 26, there is some of this more or less thing going on. To many, thou shalt give more inheritance, and to a few, thou shalt give the less, okay? There's this thought in society that says all things are equal, and they are not. Pastor White is not a tall man, and I am not a short man, and that's the way it is. Now, we're equal in many ways, but whenever it comes to measuring inches, there's a difference. And that's just the way God made us, and that's okay. Now, whenever it comes to inheritance, it's according to the numbers. It might be according to the firstborn. Maybe the firstborn gets a bonus. Maybe a special needs gets a bonus. Maybe some other things are going on, but all things are not equal. And if we have in our minds that everything has to be equal, just down to the penny, that's just not right. My grandmother used to give away some gifts from time to time, and she would take an envelope, and if she spent $10 on one child and $8.52 on the next child, she would put the difference in change in the envelope and give that change to the child to make sure that everybody was equal. This verse isn't saying that things are equal. The good steward story is not saying that things are equal. It's saying that when you've got something, you need to do something with it. And some of us have more ability and capacity, more health, more knowledge, more examples to follow. Some of us have more and some of us have less, and that's okay. But it's important that we all be doing our part as best we can. Now, there are many, many more verses. Here's a verse about the Levites, how the Levites all got a tenth. These are the people who worked in the service of the Lord in the Old Testament. They were the church workers, and they were paid from the income of the other people. Now, in the next verse down there in Numbers 18, notice that I bolded a statute forever through your generations. These were laws that were passed on forever and evermore. And from the beginning of time, we've had rules and principles about wills and how we pass inheritance on to our children. And then in Numbers 26, until these, the land shall be divided for an inheritance according to the numbers. Again, this is all about numbers, and numbers are how we keep score. Numbers are okay. Now, if you don't have a will, in the Old Testament, there was a pecking order. The statute said how it was divided. This is still true today if you have to go to probate and you don't have a will. The courts will determine the pecking order of things. But notice here, it says that, just simplifying it, if you pass away and you don't have a child, or if you don't have a son, it goes to the daughter. And if you don't have a daughter, it goes to the brother, and that would be the brother and the father who passed away. And if you don't do that, it goes to the uncles, and it goes to the nearest kinsman. There are rules for that. And each county or each state has those rules. Now, whenever we go to probate, and maybe I should start by just saying what probate is. Whenever someone passes away, let's say that this is the title to my house. It's not, it's a note card. We know that. But let's say this is a title to my house. And if I pass away and the house is in my name, who owns the house? Well, Jeff can't own it because Jeff's not here. So it becomes the property of the estate of Jeff. Well, who signs papers for the estate of Jeff? The estate of Jeff doesn't have a driver's license. It can't have a notary service. So we have to go to court and get a ruling for this. So you go file your probate papers. And with that, you file your will and your list of assets. And you got to have somebody to do this. And you have to pay fees whenever you file those papers. And if you have a lawyer do it, they take their cut of it. And then the courts decide what happens when. And they have you publish your list of assets, and all the creditors can come. And after so much time, then things can be divided to the heirs according to the will of the court. Now, I said the will of the court, and you said, but Jeff, it's my will. No, sir. Your will told the court what you want, but the court does what the court does, okay? and they're going to do what they do. Now, here's a terrible story, but it's true. Several years ago, I was working with a company and doing trust reviews, and I went to see this lady who was not quite as old as I was. She was maybe 45 or so at the time, and I was talking with her about her trust and asked if she was expecting anything from her parents, any inheritance or anything. She said that her father lived, I think it was in Arizona. Don't remember that for sure, and it's not important. But a neighbor took care of her father. And when her father died, the estate went to probate. And the neighbor said, he owes me because, and the daughter didn't know anything about this. Long story short, the neighbor took all the money and the daughter didn't get anything. So there are rules of how things pass back and forth among the people, but we can circumvent those with our will and with a trust and with the way we treat our beneficiaries. Now, there are other verses from Solomon. The wisdom of Solomon, we read some other things there, but a good man leaves an inheritance to all his children, and the wealth of sinners is laid up for the just. A wise servant shall have rule over the son that causes shame. If your son is not responsible, it's okay to pay a servant to take care of things. House and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. That's awesome. A wife is equal to the riches and the inheritance. That's a pretty high status for the wife. Proverbs 20 says, an inheritance may be gotten hastily at the beginning, but the end thereof shall not be blessed. I can tell you many stories of people who've come into money through inheritance or other means, and it's just gone in a few weeks, sometimes short weeks. A friend of mine in the business told me that he took a check to someone. It was a life insurance check, and actually he didn't take it to her. He told her whenever she got it in the mail to bring it to him, and he would help her. And she got it in the mail. She put it in the bank. And 6 weeks later, she went to him and said, what do I do now? And he asked where the check was. And she said, I spent it. What's the man to do? He didn't have anything to work with. He could have worked that out to be an income for a lifetime or for the next 5 years. But she got some money. And everybody said, I need. And it just ran away like water. In Ecclesiastes 7, wisdom is a good thing. And profit, there's the word profit again. I think we saw the word profit this morning when we were reading in Isaiah during our church service. First thing I want you to grasp here, folks, take care of your spouse and children. Do not leave them without a will or without some instructions and a safety net. You don't need to have $1 million of life insurance, but you do need to have enough of something. Self-insurance, insurance that you purchase. Self-insurance would be a savings account. You need enough of something so that you don't leave them with a burden. Please do not die and go away. Now we've got the pain and suffering of the death. And then we also have the pain and suffering of picking up the financial pieces and having to put that back together. Take care of your spouse and children. Leave that inheritance for them. It doesn't need to be a big blessing. It doesn't need to be $1 million. Don't leave them with a mess. I'm going to be telling you how to clean up some of the mess. And I'm continually cleaning up my own mess. The Bible tells us where no oxen are, the crib is clean. That means if you don't have cows in your barn is clean. But by reason of the ox, there is strength. I used to live in a dairy area, and manure management is a large part of running a farm. It's just part of the business. If you've not been around it, you might not think about it. But over here you have the feed, and in the middle you have the animals, and at the other end you have the products of the animals, which are the products that we sell and the products that we use for fertilizer. It's all part of it. And keeping our paperwork clean is like cleaning out the barn. It's not always fun, but it keeps everything healthy and going smoothly. And please take care of your spouse and your children. maybe even your parents or someone with special needs. So let's keep going through here. There are 3 essential matters that we want to look at. We're going to look at the will, we're going to look at beneficiaries, and then we're going to look at probate and how to avoid those delays and costs. And probate often costs you 3 or 6 months, if not a year or a year and a half. And a lot of that can be avoided. You don't even have to file probate in many cases. After that, we're going to talk about 4 more essential matters, and I'll go ahead and hit, I think I should just back up here and talk about each one a little bit, and then we'll review. Let's talk about a will. There are different kinds of wills. There are simple wills that just say that I leave all my things to my spouse and she should pay my bills and it's all hers. It's that simple. Then there's the next generation of what happens if she predeceases me or if I have children. So you want to deal with that. But if you have young children, you want to name who is going to care for those children. You want to choose that. If you don't choose, the courts will. They'll not only choose whoever they think is best, they'll charge your estate for making that decision. Now, do you want to choose or do you want the court to choose? You say, Jeff, this is an uncomfortable conversation. It sure is, but we need to put something in the blank, because if we don't put something in the blank, the court will. So here's what you do. You put your brother, you put your mother, you put your father, you put somebody in there. And if you change your mind later, you go change it. It's that simple. But you put somebody in there who you know and trust, otherwise the court will do it for you. And you don't want the court deciding the guardian, because that can be really messy. So you need to have a will, and it needs to be current. Folks, the laws change. I can't begin to tell you in this setting what happened to us whenever we moved to Wisconsin in 2009, but some of the laws had changed and I had changed states and I didn't understand what was going on, and it put us in a bind as dad and mom outlived their money, and then we had to work through that. Now, beneficiaries are the heirs that are listed on things like insurance policies and retirement accounts. Whenever you were at work and you signed up for your 401k or your 403b or some other form of retirement, they asked you who you wanted your beneficiaries to be. In many cases, people haven't thought through that and they leave it blank. And 5, 10, or 15 years pass and they're still blank. If those documents are blank, that money is going to go to the estate, and the estate is managed by the probate system. And so that money's going to get all tied up. It's real simple. If you want it to go to your spouse, put your spouse on there. If you want it divided equally among your kids, divide it equally among your kids. If you're not sure, put something in the hole, because it's probably not going to happen right now, but it will happen. So put an answer in there and then come back and change it. If you have life insurance or retirement papers and you're not sure about, you just call up the company and say, I need to review my beneficiaries, and you identify yourself and they'll tell you who is listed as a beneficiary. And if you need to change it, just ask them how to change it, and they'll send you the paper and tell you where to sign it. Often they'll highlight it in yellow and you sign it and stick it back in an envelope and it's done. You might be able to do it digitally, but those beneficiaries need to be current. And I have reviewed dozens and dozens of estate plans with hundreds of people, and these are not exaggerated numbers, with hundreds of people. I remember this one lady. I remember the house specifically because it was kind of across the road from an amusement park, and the house was just perfectly maintained and manicured, and they had all their papers in order. And I said, can I call your insurance company and verify your beneficiaries? Oh, it's right. Oh, it's right. And I said, well, this is process. And this is what I'm supposed to do when I'm here. May I call? And they said, go ahead. And whenever I found the beneficiary, it was her brother, and he had been dead for 15 years. These folks were in their 70s, and they had never changed the beneficiary to go to their children, and they had grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but their beneficiary was their dead brother. Now, in that case, it would go to the children of the dead brother, and their children would be left out. oh, you don't want it to go to the estate of the brother, you want it to go to your own. So review it. Please, please take care of your immediate family the way you ought to. And then as far as avoiding probate, if you keep your beneficiaries current, the moment you die, your beneficiaries get your death certificate and they take it and they say, change the name on that. Give me the money, do what they do. And it's done, because those are contractual agreements and those contracts pass to the beneficiary. Now be careful about listing your minor children as beneficiaries, because minors are minors, and by definition, minors cannot be parties to the contract. So it can get very messy if you list your minor children as your primary beneficiaries. Okay, that's a good time to talk to a financial professional or a lawyer, and this isn't the place for me to go into that, but be careful about willing money and leaving beneficiary money to minors, because it could get locked up and a lot of it's going to get lost in the administrative costs. Okay, so let's move on. After those things are in order, you want to keep a list of your assets. One of the things I did whenever I did the trust reviews with all of those folks in the estate plans is we had a list of assets, and I have a copy of them and I turned them into the company that managed these trusts, so that if there was a death, we had a list of assets and we knew what we were looking for. It's a treasure hunt. And as people get older, they have more and more stuff, and it's spread here and spread there, and they gave this away and they replaced that. It's very important to have that list. Now, number 3 down here, I have eliminate or cross out old assets. It's okay if you just update that asset list with your pen. That's okay. Now, in the digital world, this stuff can even be more lost, because if we get locked out of your hard drive, or your hard drive is damaged in an accident or something, we don't know what's going on. But more and more companies like Facebook will allow you to list a beneficiary, and there are rules, and if you don't log in every so often or so, they send an email to the beneficiary that says, hey, is so-and-so okay? And they can verify their identity and get in there and take care of things. Now, Facebook, you know, sometimes I get notices that somebody's having a birthday again, and I know that they've passed away. I'm glad to remember their birthday, but it might be better if somebody could get in there and update the data and make that current. Okay? Be sure to tell your trusted people where your documents are. And you got to have people you can trust. Sometimes this means you need to hire an outsider, a lawyer, or someone who is not emotionally involved in the situation. So those are 7 ideas that will really help you. Let me review them again. You've got to have a current will that's current in the state in which you live. Keep your beneficiaries up to date. Avoid probate. It's costly and it takes a lot of time and emotional drag. Keep a list of your assets. Mark up that list. Keep it current. Deal with your digital assets so that we can find them and know what's going on there. And tell your trusted people where to find these things. Now let's talk about the essential documents. I've talked a little bit about the will, but make sure you have a right will. A simple will is fine if you're a traditional man and woman with some children, but if you have special needs children, or a blended marriage, or a blended marriage with some other children, maybe from a different situation, adoption, all kinds of things happen, and you've got to spell out what comes first. And that's a good time to have a lawyer, because they're experienced with this. And if you go to a lawyer with all of your facts in hand and ask them to be efficient and get it done, they can get it done for more money or less money, okay? You need to be able to negotiate with them. If you don't know what you want, they'll be glad to sit there at $200 an hour and ask you all kinds of questions and help you think about it. But if you think about it ahead of time, if you download some basic forms or read about it, educate yourself, then go to the lawyer, they'll be able to help you quickly, and it will cost less that way. Now, there are different kinds of powers of attorney, but I'm speaking specifically of a financial power of attorney This is someone who can deal with your finances in the event that you can't. My mother had multiple sclerosis and couldn't sign her name. She couldn't hold a pen, and I was her financial power of attorney. Once in a while, she had to put an X somewhere, and if she did, we had to have probably a notary and witnesses there, and it was a big hassle. But in most cases, I had a document that she had already signed with her ex and with that notary, and I could flash my document and say, I'm here to speak for Shirley Crum. She wants to do this. Where do I sign for her? And poof, it was done, and I signed Jeffrey T. Crum, POA Shirley M. Crum, or attorney in fact, AIF. The places always told me how to sign it, and they kept a copy of that power of attorney. Now, a living will and a healthcare power of attorney varies from state to state. I was helping someone with this recently, and I just went on one of the hospital websites here in town and downloaded the documents for free. For free. Did you get that tip? It's free. It's a standard document. You have to go in there and list who would speak for you if you're having a bad day. I had a car wreck and I can't speak for myself. Here's what I want done. These are two different documents. One is about making day-to-day decisions for you that you can't make for yourself. The other is the terminal decision about whether you want life support or extreme life-saving measures. So they're two separate things. Sometimes they come in the same document. You can download them all over the place. You can download wills. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go see a lawyer. It is very good to see a lawyer and to get the education from that and to have them customized to meet your needs. But you don't have to. You don't have to. If you go into a nursing home, take your parents into a nursing home, they'll have these documents right there. And there aren't that many blanks to fill out, and the social worker will explain many of the definitions to you. Now, one of the things you can do with your cash equivalents, your bank accounts, is to retitle those bank accounts POD, that is payable on death. And again, I got these statements in the mail from my father's broker, his stockbroker, and it said Jeffrey T. Crum, TOD in that case, which is transfer on death. Payable on death, transfer on death, it's the same idea. If we've got a cash equivalent, whoever this is payable to takes the death certificate and goes to the bank and says, Daddy passed away, I'm a POD, give me my money. And it's done. There is no will, there is no probate, because the bank account says if Daddy's not here, it's immediately payable on death to whoever is listed there. The same thing is true with the brokerage accounts or non-cash accounts. You can even do this for your real estate. You can put it on your deed sometimes. So you can deed your house to transfer on death, and it will not go through the will. It will not go through probate, because if Daddy's dead, ownership immediately passes to whoever is the TOD. Again, consult a lawyer. I'm only here in the role of a teacher. I don't have a law degree, nor am I licensed to practice law. So if you have questions, consult someone who is licensed to practice law. Let me move on through these. Now, I mentioned that I worked with revocable living trusts quite a bit. One part of me says that everyone needs a trust, and another part of me says it's a big hassle if you don't need it. If your estate is small, just $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 or something, it might not be worth it. But if you have, like we have, we've got a couple of rentals, we've got a residential house, we've got other things going on. We used to have a farm. I have my business. My wife had her business. It was complicated. In that case, it's good to have a trust. Now, the reason I went to review those trusts was to make sure that they were funded. A trust is a notebook. It has 5, 6, 7 chapters in it. One of the first chapters is the certificate of trust. And the certificate of trust is the summary that says, these are the settlers, here's mom and dad, and they established this trust, and here are the trustees. The trustees are the people with the keys to the car, okay? This trust is a vehicle, it's a bucket. And if you don't fund your trust, you're in trouble. So the trust is a bucket, and then you need to put your house, your business, your LLC, whatever you put inside that trust, and the trust owns it. The trust owns it. Now the trustees get to drive it. And as long as mom and dad are alive and they're driving, that's fine. But whenever mom and dad are incapacitated, can't speak for themselves, then the trustee takes the certificate of trust to the bank or to sell the real estate or do what they do. And the trustee sells it on behalf of the people who actually are meant to own it, okay? But the thing about a trust is it never dies. So if your home is owned by the trust and you pass away, the trust still owns the home. And then the trustee can come and do what they do with the signatures and move it on. It doesn't go to probate that way. So because the trust is different from the estate. Now, again, these things can be commingled and you might want to see some legal help. But as part of a trust, you still have a will. Now, this is called a pour-over will. And this will is written a little differently. It says that I have a trust and I meant to put everything in the trust, but if I forgot something, it is my will that it go to the trust. So if you forget to fund the trust, you have to go through probate, and then the court system is supposed to take the items that missed being in the trust. They were never funded to the trust. That's a technical kind of term, funded to the trust or titled to the trust. You go to probate, and the probate would put the items in the name of the trust, and then the trustees can deal with it. But that probate system is going to cost hundreds of dollars and probably several months to make that happen. So it's much better to fund things to the trust. If the trust owns them, it's done, and then the trustees can sign for them. Okay, so you still have a will, even if you have a trust. The will is inside. You have your financial power of attorney, and then you'll have your healthcare power of attorney, as well as your living will, or any other documents pertaining to that are specific to the state where you live. Now, the POD and the TOD I already talked about. That's not part of the trust, and that's not part of the estate, because those items will transfer or pass upon death without going through probate and without going through the trust. Same thing is true about life insurance policies or retirement accounts or other things that have beneficiaries. They will transfer upon death or be retitled upon death, whatever the technical version of that is. They'll be passed on to the heirs or the beneficiaries at that point. Now, as far as POD, yeah, let me finish this statement and then I'll take your question. As far as POD and TOD, if you want to set these up, you just go to your bank or go to your brokerage house and tell them that you want to do that, and they'll help you do it. The process is a little different at a bank and a credit union and the brokerage house. Pastor, what's your question there?
Yeah, so if you have a will, you have a power of attorney and a living will and healthcare power of attorney, then you don't need the trust, do you?
Trust would include these things.
Right.
But if you have a will and the financial power of attorney and the healthcare taken care of, you may or may not need a trust. But those are all inside the trust.
Yeah.
A trust would include them.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So, any other questions while I'm stopped here?
No.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So here are some takeaways for you to help you. First of all, are your documents current? Or maybe a question that precedes this, are your documents current? Do you have documents? Okay, if you don't have a document, if you don't have a will, it's not current. And 40 or 50% of the people don't have a will. And do your trusted people know where those documents are? So have documents, make sure they're current, and make sure your trusted people know where they are, okay? And here are 3 things that I've said several times before that I want to remind you about. If you hear noise in the background, I think we're about to have a thunderstorm. So be intentional and plan now. Be intentional. Don't sweep this under the rug. It's not going to go away. It's not going to get better. If you don't know what to do, do something. Do something. And then come back and do it better whenever you know how to do it better. But do something, Nothing is bad. Something is better. Okay? Be intentional and plan now. Start wherever you are. If you don't have money, if you can't hire a lawyer, do it the simple way. I've given you ideas of how to do it the simple way. And then keep moving in the right direction. Things will come up. You'll get bogged down. This is emotionally heavy. I was asking some folks the other day what would happen if the spouse passed away. And one of the spouse was working, making a lot of money. The other one was staying at home. And the one who was staying at home, it was real clear. They wanted the money to keep coming in. They wanted the money to keep coming in. That was their concern. But the spouse that was working hadn't thought about the value that the homemaker brought to the situation. Well, that homemaker, they shopped, they cooked, they kept the yard, they kept the books, they ran the books for the business. And if they were no longer there, they would leave a hole. And it was a very awkward conversation because each felt that they were placing a number on the other. Don't feel like you're putting a score on the other. It's not like that. Figure out a number that would help replace those services that the spouse or the loved one is providing for you. But wherever you are, start and move forward, okay? That's the biggest tip I can give you, is be better tomorrow than you are today. If you'd like to talk about any of this stuff, remember I'm available. You can also email the church. That is opendoorarchdale@gmail.com. Again, opendoorarchdale@gmail.com. Okay, now I'm going to quickly review what we talked about in the other videos, and you can go watch them if you'd like. Our second video was about cash flow. That's income and expenses, and we talked about the value of a budget. A budget is our buddy. It helps us know what we can afford. It helps us put money to places that are most important to us, and it frees us from the worries of running out of money because we know how much gas is in the tank. Remember, we compared it to a gas gauge on a car. It helps us be prepared for surprises, and it protects a margin to give and to save. Warns us of potential trouble. Whenever we see that red light coming on that says low fuel, low fuel, low fuel, we're more careful about the way we drive, and we don't take those extra trips somewhere. We make sure that we go get fueled up before we take that extra trip. So our budget is our buddy. We talked about destroying debt and different strategies for that. Specifically, I gave you 4 strategies. One was the snowball, which is the most popular. That's where you take, you make a list of all your debts, and you take the smallest debt and you pay it off first. And then you take that payment and apply it to the next smallest debt. And you pay that one off. And then you take that bigger payment and apply it to the next one. And it begins to snowball. That is emotionally encouraging to most people. Now, the avalanche method is a little different. That's where you pay off your highest interest first. And statistically, it works better. But most people need their emotional encouragement more than they need their statistical facts. Our emotions help us get things done. Another way we can do things is just to round our payments up a little bit. And particularly with our mortgage, if we make one extra payment a year, it'll almost cut your mortgage time in half. Whenever we're talking about a 30-year mortgage, that usually gets us around 17 or 18 years. Of course, this is a general statement. It varies according to your interest rate and things like that, okay? We also talked about protection. Planning now for future expenses. We know they're going to come, but we don't know which one's going to come next. And then we talked about future income, and that's saving for the future. Remember, the first way we plan for the uncertainties is to have our rainy day account. It's raining outside. Maybe my roof's going to leak, or maybe a branch is going to fall and hit a window. Something's going to happen. If I've got some cash in my pocket, I can afford to pay that insurance deductible. And remember, one of the tips I gave you was to have a higher deductible, which would lower your cost of insurance. If I've got a cash fund on hand, then I can afford to pay my deductible. It's good to have a cash fund, a reserve fund, a rainy day account, a mental freedom fund of 3, 6, 9, 12 months of living expenses. And if you've got that in the bank, it will give you some freedom to walk away from a bad job, or to wake up feeling good the day after you lose your job or something happens, you've got the money that you need. We talked about future income. I talked a little bit about different types of annuities at that point, and you can watch that video if you'd like about future income. Now, remember, each week we've talked about biblical foundations, and I just want to review a couple of those with you as we wrapped up this series. Thank you for watching. It's been 6 good weeks for us. 3 foundations about investing. Number 1, avoid impulsive actions. This is from Proverbs 14. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but a hasty spirit exalteth folly or foolishness. When we make impulsive decisions, they're often not very good. But whenever we're thoughtful, whenever we plan ahead, have a strategy, and play the plan, we do much better. A sound heart is life to the flesh. Soundness. I can depend on that. But envy is the rottenness of the bones. Envy often makes us impulsive. So be careful about that. Now, have your daily matters in order before you start investing. Just Friday at 5 o'clock, someone in the state of Washington called me to ask about investing. And they said, we've just got our life in order. We have $5,000 in our emergency fund. I want to invest in the stock market. And we had a little conversation about, was that emergency fund big enough to risk investing in the stock market? And I suggested they do some other things that they understood better, because they didn't know a stock from a bond or anything. And they shouldn't be in the stock market because that would just be like straight gambling with them. They didn't know what was going on. So I suggested that they buy some things and sell some things, buy a box of sunglasses and sell them at the flea market, because that's something they can touch and they understand. And they understand, if I buy this for $3 and sell it for $10, that works. And if I buy it for $3 and sell it for $1, I lost money. They can understand that. That's what would work for them. So have your daily matters in order. Remember, get your field in order before you build the house, because if you can't eat, it doesn't matter if you got a fancy house. And make a plan. The third one down there, the thoughts of the diligent tend to plenteousness. Planners have more, but hasty people are hungry. They want. So is it biblical to invest? It sure is. We want to multiply what we've been given. We talked about that in Genesis. We talked about it in Matthew. And then we talked about it again today. Multiply your talent, whatever your talent is. Your talent might be money, or it might be skill. It might be playing the piano. Do it better. It might be being a good teacher, or being hospitable. If that's your gift, do well. If you're a horse, be a good horse. If you're a kidney, be a good kidney. Every part of the body is valuable, but do your part well, whatever that is. We want to invest so that we can meet our own future obligations in spite of our health. Many of us outlive our working years, and we want to be able to pay our own way, carry our own freight. And then we want to be able to minister more now and in the future. And if we take our talent, like that bad steward, and bury it, it's not growing, and it can't do more than it is. So we want to grow what we have. And budgeting helps us to keep track of what we have. Insurance and protection helps us to maintain what we have whenever big expenses come our way. And then investing helps us to grow what we have. But we do not ever want to feed the envy and the greed and the pride, because these are not reasons to invest. Don't go down that road. So the Bible tells us that riches fly away. But remember, in Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:19 says, laying up store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come. We want to have a good, strong financial foundation as well as a spiritual foundation. So we are near the end of our session here. And I'll remind you of a verse from Isaiah and a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up. Isaiah says, in Isaiah 48. I am the Lord thy God, which teacheth thee to profit, which leadeth thee by the way that thou shalt go. The Bible has answers for daily living. And if we read it, study it, and apply it, we learn to live. Here are 5 more tips for better investing. Have your financial house in order before you start. Know your debt, know your protection, know your income and expenses. Time is your biggest ally. Remember, we talked about the rule of 72. You take 72 and divide by your interest rate, and that tells you how many years it takes your money to double. So if you've got a credit card, it tells you how many years it's going to be before that debt doubles if you're not paying down fast enough. And on the flip side, it can tell us the value of our home, the value of our mortgage, how often those numbers double, whether they're in our favor or in the favor of the lender. If you can't afford to lose it, you might not want to invest it. Safety and risk are opposites. The higher risk, the higher opportunity for reward, but also the higher opportunity for loss. Some of us need to play pretty safe, but sticking your money under a mattress will not keep up with inflation. You might want to keep some money in the house. That's probably a good idea, but you don't want to keep a lot. Remember to diversify. Solomon talked about 7 yea 8. Remember, cast your bread on the water. Send your wheat out and see what comes back, because we don't know what perils will happen. We don't know what will come back and what won't. So we need to diversify, but don't diversify too much. People can get so distracted with that, and they end up with their money in 1,000 things, and they can't keep up with it. Okay, this brings us to the end of our seminar. I want to encourage you to watch and share these videos. We have 6 now, and you can find them at Open Door Archdale if you search that at YouTube. Now I'm going to stop the recording now. I appreciate so much you being with us, and I look forward to answering your questions as you send them along. Thank you so much. May God bless you.